Jen, welcome to the Bigger Picture. And I'm so honored and thrilled that you're here today. I would love to just kick it off by you sharing a little bit about who you are and what you are doing in the world now, which is, I know, many things.
Thank you, Tracy. You're one of my favorite people. I say I am so happy to be here with you, with your listeners, your viewers. I meet so many thousands of people every year, and definitely in the last year, you were one of my favorite people I've met. So I'm so grateful that we get to just play in the space of consciousness together and world serving. That's what it's about. I think that's why your audience is listening to this and why they listen to you is that life is about being of service. I don't know about you. Every day I wake up and I go through my 2 hour spiritual practice every morning. And I just ask, put me where you need me most. Let me be of service. Let me listen deeply. Let me be guided, my words, thoughts, and actions. And that's where my life is. And it wasn't always this way. I used to be a lot more focused on the self and I was a business Barbie, for lack of a better word. I built and sold a company in the legal recruiting space. I don't know how else to put it. I was working in big corporates with big corporates, got acquired by a big corporate, and yeah, and then all of a sudden I had this epiphany, this wake up in late 2019 after I'd exited the company. I had this opportunity to host a new TV show, which was loose in quotes on a network called Awake. And a few weeks after that, Deepak Chopra and Don Hoffman were some of my first guests on the show. And that spiraled into a 17-part series called Conversations at the Intersection of Cutting Edge Science and Spirituality. And that also birthed a series of new companies that I've developed. One which is in the consultancy space where I do consulting and speaking around the world, Metaphysics. And the other one, which is a technology company that's about connecting people, OptiMatch. And my life's work now is to help every human being that I come in contact with, and by doing so, help them have an impact in a positive way for those they come in contact with, to have a deep and meaningful relationship with themselves and others and their purpose. And I really wish if I had a magic fairy wand, I'd be like, boop, you get that, and you get that. And I would just go around spreading magic fairy dust to every human I come in contact with.
Yes, I love that about you. And you are also one of my favorite people in the world, too. So I'm glad that we can share our mutual love for one another publicly on the podcast.
I
Uh,
love it. No, it's so great. Just being able to just be in intimacy and in love with people, like in love with life. And what I don't know about you, Tracy, I've just noticed like the more we love ourselves, the more we cultivate natural love and affinity and intimacy with ourselves and our own inner knowing, inner children, whatever it is, the more that every human we meet is a beautiful reflection back of that same love we have for ourselves.
100%. I totally agree. And you said a couple of things that I want to dive into. And so I'm going to start with the first is you said, I love the word business Barbie, by the way. Because I guess I was a business Barbie too at one time and also did similar things and sold my company. And I think that certainly gave me a level of satisfaction in my life, right? But it sounds like for you, you were operating that way and then now you're operating a different way. And what are some of the most profound or experiences or ways of looking at the world as a business Barbie and as a fairy godmother dropping fairy dust and love to people? What would you say is like the most profound difference that you've experienced?
It's a great question, Tracy. And first, I'm going to give context because that's what's decisive. Is the context is what gives us who we're being, what we're doing, the actions we take, and how we take those actions. As a dear friend of mine, I think I may have introduced you to her, Jocelyn Herman Sachi, always reminds me. In the context, I'm holding up for those of you listening, I'm holding up my index finger. In the context of body part or appendage, it's an index finger. In the context of direction, it's pointing up. And in the context of number, it's the number one. The context when I was Business Barbie was drive, accomplish, do, conquer, right? It's like that old systematic Darwinian evolution by natural selection, you win or you perish, which I love. Like Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, was one of my first businessy books I read when I was 18 years old. And the general lands his ships on the shores of enemy territory, and then he burns the ships and looks at his soldiers and says, "We win or we perish." And that was really Business Barbie life. We perish. Burn the ships, we win, we perish, we build a company. And then I would say Fairy Godmother Jen, Spirit Sprinkle Jen, of just traveling around the world and connecting people, which there's nothing that brings me greater joy than that. The context for this person is just freedom, connection, and contribution. That's what gives who I show up as every day, from my morning Qigong practice to meditation to every call I get on. The opening, instead of looking for conquer, destroy, win, it's like service, connection, contribution, consciousness. And that's really what informs any call I'm on, any podcast I'm doing, any article I write. I ask myself internally, is this going to serve? As one of my other teachers who I love and adore, David Guillaume, says, brilliant podcaster, he says, you're either a builder or you're a destroyer. And with every word we take, with every, or sorry, every word we say or every action we take, we have to ask ourselves, not have to, cancel, I like to be very considerate of the language I use. With every word we speak or action we take, we have the opportunity to ask ourselves, am I building or destroying with this word, with this action? And I think we're not perfect. We're human. We're all going to have moments of breakdown and lack of ability to regulate ourselves. We were talking about that right before we hopped on. Of I had a wonderful opportunity for my growth and development on Monday. I was like, oh, I literally came off the back end of best weekend ever. Sunday was magical. I was like at a boogie brunch with a bunch of friends in Lisbon dancing. I took the afternoon to paint. I did qigong. I had movie night with my husband. It couldn't have been any better. And then contrast. That's what life is, contrast. There is no good or bad or right or wrong. There's just contrast. And on Monday, something happened that was a very stark contrast. And I was like, got it. Okay. So you can't appreciate the greatest highs without also experiencing sometimes what can occur as a low.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because you said science and spirituality, which what you're saying here with this example is that it's actually the intersection of both. And I find that those that are focused on expanding their consciousness, about being in service, about creating in ways that feel expansive versus depleting, but they teeter totter on either going all the way in one direction or all the way in the opposite direction. And what I see and where we're moving to in the world is we're coming back into balance and we're intersecting both of those business Barbies and the fairy godmother. Right? This is going to be a great way. We can start using that language.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I used to describe myself, and it's so funny. I used to bifurcate myself. I'd be business Barbie, travel Barbie, meditation Barbie, and we do. We often compartmentalize ourselves to exactly the point you just raised, Tracy. We have this bifurcation of our beingness of, oh, I show up one way with my husband, I show up another way with my friends. And I remember the first time I actually had an intersection of different groups meeting. You know how you bring different friends together, where at least for me, when I was in my early 20s, I had my partier friends, I had my work friends, and it's you invite them all over for game night or wine or whatever it is. And you're like, oh God, what's going to happen? Is this going to work? Is it going to blow up in my face? And what I've since realized is that people just love being with one another when there's just an openness and a spaciousness to be. And I think that's the middle ground. It's not business Barbie or work Barbie or whichever or travel Barbie. It's a everybody just gets to intersect from a place of kindness, compassion, understanding, and mutual appreciation. And I think from that place, that's the middle ground, that intersection of science and spirituality. Where could I have a conversation? There were many interesting conversations that we had where one person might have a very stark physicalist perspective on something we were discussing, where somebody else might have a very different esoteric perspective. And yet there's also an intersection of even those things. And can we play in the intersection? I think is a question we're being called to play with as humans right now.
Yeah, I agree. And so, where do you find that friction, that contrast that you're talking about in business? Because I think and find that life, let's call it, When you're with your family or with your friends or you're on the weekend, it's much easier. You have less contrast in the fairy godmother world, right? But when you come back into Monday on business, you're then faced with KPIs, you're faced with strategies, you're faced with obstacles, challenges that you need to move through. And not that that doesn't happen in outside of business, but find that it becomes more of a challenge for people to really integrate that way of being when they step back into their role of founder or entrepreneur, because it's all about the bottom line and getting results. Where do you see your biggest challenge in business in that intersection, that balance place?
Interesting. It's a great question, Tracy. And I think that for me, who I've integrated and become since I exited the last company and building this new technology company and the consulting company I've been doing work with, is there's no difference for me between a Friday and a Monday or a Sunday, for example. Sometimes on a Saturday, the only way that there's contrast for me that shows up is on a Saturday. I'll often turn off my phone for part or all of the day, and I'll also spend at least normally an hour, sometimes 3, 5, 7, 8 hours in silence. So I would say the background, the backdrop of my life is that I only work and get on calls and spend time with people I would have over to my house for dinner or even to stay with me. Just like you and I hit it off, we connected. And so I don't really get that juxtaposition, that contrast, because one flows into the next. And there was a great quote, I think it was by the creator of Peter Pan, who said, "It's only work if you'd rather be doing something else." And so that's really always been my rule of thumb in business is I'm unwilling and unyielding to compromise, to invest time, because that's what it is. My husband once gave me this quote. He said, "It's an investment of time. As much as we invest our money, our investment of where we put our time is equally as important, if not more." And so I don't invest my time in people, energy, situations that don't bring me the greatest joy, that don't bring me equal amounts of joy as I would get reading a book silently or meditating on a Saturday.
Yeah, there is no separation.
Yeah. It's all the same, and yet we live life like it's separate, like everybody lives. I can't tell you what day of the week it is half the time. I have no idea. It could be Sunday, it could be Monday, it could be I don't know what day today. Okay, I think it's Wednesday. But it all just flows because I get to wake up, and this is the difference of living your life by design. A friend of mine, Curtis Estes, many years ago, wrote a book called Your Life by Design. You can probably still find it. He wrote it like 15 years ago, and it had this beautiful little triangle, and there was an exercise in the workbook. And that was at the bottom of the triangle. If you imagine Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's like the needs that you have to get met, like food, shelter, etc. But in Curtis's case, at the bottom of the triangle, you actually had things like you hated doing, like taking out the garbage is on there for me. That's like a put a gun to my head, maybe I'll do it, but it's not. I will outsource that to somebody else. Then you go up the pyramid and you look at the things you really prefer not to do, but you might do it. Vacuuming, one of those. I'm just giving funny cleaning analogies. And then you move up the second to the top rung, which is things you actually enjoy doing. It's not your favorite, but you enjoy doing it. So walking the dog might fall on that in my case. I'm just giving non-business ones. And then you reach like the top of the rung, which for me is connecting with people or meditating or going on adventures, traveling the world, spending quality time with my husband, dog, friends, family, whatever it is. Then eventually we look at our investment of time, and I think that's the beautiful thing about what's happening with AI. So many people are terrified about this. And I was just reading a book called The Celestine Prophecy. Have you read that one?
A very long time ago.
Yeah, many people did. I recommend for any of you who read it a long time ago or haven't read it, it's worth revisiting. I just wrote a LinkedIn article about it actually today and posted it about the four control dramas. But the reason I bring it up is one of the last, spoiler alert, by the way, skip this part if you don't want to know how it ends,
No,
but
we're
it's about
careful.
yeah, it's about finding the 9 insights and these 9 pieces of wisdom to help us evolve as humans. And one of the insights talks about how do we live as future humans. And what's cool is this book was written 30 years ago before the emergence of ChatGPT and AI and agents and so forth. And they said there'll come a time where people might work 3 or 4 day work weeks and that people will be paid instead of for working in physical manual labor for insights. And I think we're at that critical mass time right now. where we're going to stop trading our time for energy and we might start trading our insights and wisdom for energy or money or whatever that looks like. And it just feels very resonant with what we're going through right now as human beings.
Oh, I totally agree. And I'm not an AI expert. So I'm just prefacing this before I share my thoughts, but absolutely believe, obviously, any technology can be used to be supportive or not supportive, right? It can be extractive or regenerative, right? And so that's all choice that we all get to make as a humans beings living in society. But I think that AI is literally going to support us in living our dharma, in
Yeah,
living in our essence, doing what you're saying is what we are so in love with and are so naturally gifted at. Like you're a naturally gifted connector. I think we were talking once and we were talking about how you're like literally a super connector. And it's not that you're doing it to get something. You're not doing it to build your network so you could then have opportunities. You're doing it because you get joy out of it and you're great at it, right? And it's natural for you.
yeah,
And
and that's what I wish. The fairy godmother part of me wants to be like, boop, you get that is what lights us up, what brings us joy. Do more of that. I was just talking to a coaching client this week or last week, I think it was, and he was talking about a new business he's considering creating. And I was like, listen, you can go and you can build this and you can build it for somebody else. But I said, what's lighting you up? Is this a problem that if you were to solve this, not only for yourself, but for other people every day, would that put a smile on your face? Because I think that we have an opportunity as humanity to hit critical mass of joy. And as there was a wonderful analogy that the Kabbalists used, I study Kabbalah among many other spiritual disciplines in my meditation practice and so forth. And the Kabbalists have this beautiful analogy where they say humanity is playing a game. And
Mhm.
it's called this game of life where you have these two scales. If you imagine the scales of justice or whatever you might want to think of, and every time we do an act of kindness, we're generous, we're giving, we smile at another human being, we open a door for somebody. You're dropping a sesame seed on the side of the scales of justice for good or kindness, whatever you want to call it. And every time we're intolerant, we're judgmental to ourselves or others, and the same applies for the other, then you're dropping a sesame seed on the side for evil, dark, whatever you want to call it. And the game that we're playing, and this is a game that humanity is playing, is to drop enough sesame seeds on the side for good that it actually topples the sides on the evil, whatever side you want to call it, over onto the side of good, of positive. And I think that's what we're doing. I think we're playing a game. We've forgotten that we're playing a game. And the more that we can reconnect, that's what's going to have humanity shift and hit critical mass where instead of separation, anxiety, fear, the loneliness epidemic, we're going to see a connection epidemic of where more people are connected than they ever have been to themselves, others, and their purpose. And that's what I'm a stand for.
Yeah, me too. I agree. I see this as what we're going through and have been going through. It's not that it just began yesterday, to be clear, right? We've been on a trajectory for decades and decades, but it's the greatest opportunity we actually have as humanity. And it's really up to us to what are we going to do with it? How are we going to play the game? What ending, what level of the game of Pac-Man, right, are we going to land in? And so I think that we can have different perspectives. We can have a perspective like the SHIT, I can't say that podcast, right? It's hitting the fan. Or we can say this may be the greatest opportunity we have. What do we want to create with it? What do we want it to be? And I think we've forgotten that we actually have that internal inner power to do so, to create.
Yeah, that's what the Kabbalists say. It's a beautiful analogy of how the universe was theoretically birthed, and it's that you originally had endless light, and you had a vessel to receive the light, which was at the time humanity before we broke off into billions of sparks. And all there was a source that gave light and a source that received light, and that was all we did. And that's cool. And you're like receiving. And then one day we said, "Oh, I want to give as well as receive. This whole receiving thing is for the birds. I don't want to just receive. I also want to be like the light. I want to give. And that moment we made that choice, bam, we practiced this thing where we broke off into billions of sparks of what you could now theoretically call humanity's souls. However, in order for us to give and receive in the same way that, that we wanted to be able to, we had to have conflict. We had to have contrast. And the Kabbalistic analogy they use is they say that imagine if you're playing a game of soccer and you're kicking a ball in a net. There's no goalie there. That's not a game. It's just the same thing as receiving. The moment, though, that you put a goalie in front of the net, most would argue that then becomes a soccer game. You're playing against something. So, what happened that moment we said we wanted to give and receive is we put our own metaphorical goalie in front of the net, which is our ego, which you could call like what religions call Satan or whatever. You can call it whatever you want, it doesn't matter. But we put an adversary there so we could play this game against ourselves so we could go back and see what it feels like to give and receive.
Yeah, I love that soccer game analogy. And I think if we really thought about it, if we did not have contrast, we would not evolve and grow. There would be stagnancy,
Yeah.
right? So my philosophy in life and business, and I know yours is similar, is that everything is truly happening for us. And where can we see the gift in what's being shown to us, whether we prefer the experience or not? It's all a gift. It's up to us to see it
Interpret.
and interpret it, right? And I
Yeah.
use that in business and in life, like I said, in all aspects. I don't know if you see it differently or use it differently.
I think it actually ties into what you and I were talking about before we even got on the call. I think there's also the danger in this of spiritually bypassing things, which I know I am culpable of to my own extent sometimes. It's, oh, I have all these great neuroscience techniques. I have 183 tools I use for myself and clients and people I work with. And oh, let me just spiritually bypass that. I'm going to reprogram my brain to be healthy and happy and whatever it is. But sometimes, as we were talking about with a recent opportunity I had, sometimes you need to scream. Sometimes you need to feel sadness. Sometimes you need to feel anger and not bypass it and know that there's contrast and it's there to help us so that when we have those moments of joy, sadness, or pain from our adversary that's playing soccer with us, that it's there because there's something greater. I think most of us, 99.99999% of us, can see, even if we can't see it in this moment, if something's fresh, we're still caught in the story and the blaming, the whodunit, right? But the moment we get perspective on it, it could be a day, it could be a month, it could be 10 years, then all of a sudden the bigger picture unfolds and we see how somehow, some way, your story of the hardship you went through maybe it's the thing that helps inspire one person, 1,000, 100,000 other people. And that's the thing is we never know where the story is leading, just that we're in the story playing a game, doing the best that we can to be of service to ourselves and others.
Mhm. Beautiful. I love that. I love this game of life.
Yes, that's what it is. I love it. It's a game. It's like we all play a game, whether it's video games or Super Mario Brothers. If we don't read the rule book to how to win at the game, you can't win the damn game. If nobody ever gave you the how to win at Monopoly, okay, you could put a house here and you could take the, I don't know, like the sewing thumb or whatever it is. You could put it on the board, but you're never going to win at it. So most of us don't realize that there are tools to win at the game of life. I have 183 I use, many of which are Kabbalistic, but there's meditation. And if we actually understood that there are tools to win at the game against this pretend adversary we put in here, it becomes more fun.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like we are, as humanity too, are learning the rules. It's like we're getting the beginning description of how the game is played, and then we're going to get the rules when we're all ready, when we're all at a level of consciousness where we can be responsible also with those rules, because there's a lot of power in mastering those rules, I have found. And I always say with great power becomes great responsibility.
Yeah, that's why, Kabbalistically speaking, these tools, many of the ones I've learned in the last 13 years, have only been visible and made aware to humanity in the last 40 years, except for mystics, like people who study it. And because there can be danger. You see it played out in every hero movie that ever exists. The bad guy gets access to the superpower that can destroy humanity. And that's it. I always like to use the analogy, speaking of superheroes, with Batman. It's one of my favorite analogies to use. Batman is one of the only superheroes who's not superhuman, but what he has is a super tool belt. And
Mm.
that's my goal for every one of us as the fairy godmother of connection and resources, etc. Is I wish I could gift everybody the tools that we need in our super tool belt so that way we can regain access to our higher brain function when we're unable to regulate our nervous system and we're triggered. To have these tools in our tool belt when we're falling off a metaphorical cliff, somebody breaks up with us, we lose a job, something happens politically, people die. That how do we actually do this? And anything I say to anybody else, I apply it. It's not something I would ever tell somebody to do that I haven't been in the mud, hands dirty, doing myself. People couldn't understand it last year when my dad died. It was almost a year ago exactly. I was totally at peace because I love my dad. There was no attachment. I still feel just as connected to him now as when he was still in human form. And yet, I used all the tools that I suggest to other people. Anything I'm saying, whether it's the loss of a job, a loss of a loved one, whatever it is, we use the tools to help pull ourselves back up and off the metaphorical cliff where we feel like we're falling off of.
Yeah, I love the Batman analogy too. I think real world examples and analogies I find are so helpful in the realm of what's often labeled as esoteric, because we
Mm.
can really then ground it in and understand the connection. So thank you for sharing some of your tools and how you use your tools with us today. And is there anything else that you feel called to share today that we didn't cover?
It's funny, the last thing I'm being called to share is a dream I recently had that I think is a metaphor for maybe some of us going through
Yeah.
the hardship might look like in your life. I know so many of us have that in different ways. The other night, actually, ironically, right after I had this particular challenge myself on Monday night, I had this dream, and I often get these really vivid dreams. They're almost like seeing a movie in Technicolor. And I was at this event, and there was this river, and it was like a rushing river with rapids going about. And somehow or another, I heard the words in the dream jump in and surrender.
Mm.
Now, if I had resisted being in the river and the rapids, I would have bumped and hit against the rocks. I could have wound up dead. But all I heard was surrender. So I jump in the water, I surrender, and I just let the rapids turn me, churn me, and it wove me around and through the rocks until one moment culminated, Tracy, where I'm there and a huge waterfall comes up, and here I am just surrendered, and I went right up and over the edge of the waterfall in a sheer drop down its cliffside. And then somehow, miraculously, it dropped me into the most exquisite,
Mm.
peaceful, underground river that you have ever seen in your life that was in this cave. And there were these glowing white stalactites and stalagmites coming down from the ceiling and up from the ground. And the river was glowing this iridescent turquoise blue. And I think it's a metaphor I'd just love to leave everybody with because when I journaled on it later and reflected on the meaning of the stream, it's that sometimes we're going to go through rapids in our life. And we might feel like we're in the washing machine of life being turned this way and that. We don't know which way is up. And we're going to go over this metaphorical waterfall where you don't know if you're going to die. You literally feel like you might not survive whatever this waterfall is in your life. And yet, if you can be surrendered, you can wind up in an even more peaceful, beautiful place than your wildest dreams could have ever fathomed.
It's thank you for sharing that. And that is such a beautiful metaphor for winning at the game of life.
Mm.
So perfect. A synopsis of our conversation. So thank you, Jen, for coming and chatting with me today. And it's always lovely to see you and spend time with you. And I will drop all of your socials and whatnot below. So if people want to connect with you, they have access to that. Thank you for being on the bigger picture.
And thank you for opening the bigger picture to humanity.